Hello, crafty friends, and welcome to my channel. Today, I'm diving into a technique that I have never tried before, and honestly, I'm so excited about it. We are creating a faux stained glass background. Yes, that's gorgeous, glossy, dimensional look. Totally inspired by a Jennifer McGuire video that I have been absolutely obsessed with for the past few weeks. You can use this technique with almost any outline die you already have, but I'll be working with this stunning stained glass poinsettia window die by Cat Scrappiness for today's project. Now, I do want to give you a heads up. This is not one of those last minute holiday cards. This beauty takes time between all the coloring, all the glossy accents, and the full day I gave it to dry completely. But trust me, the results are so worth it. And if you use a smaller outline die, this technique becomes much more mass production friendly. Get ready for something unique, eye catching, and totally magical. Let's get right into it. I absolutely love this poinsettia background die. I've used it in so many of my past projects, especially with the die cut inlay technique, cutting different colors of cardstock to build that beautiful poinsettia image and piecing everything back together like a little puzzle. For today's project, I took a different approach. I die cut this frame from four separate white cardstock panels. Since we are adding glossy accents to each of those tiny wells for that faux stained glass look, I really wanted to build up the thickness of the frame. That extra dimension creates deeper wells for glossy accents to sit in, and it makes such a huge difference in the final effect. Now, with the dyes like this, especially the ones with tons of tiny little spaces and delicate details, I love using my dye brush tool by Sizzix. All you have to do is roll the brush right over the dye and it easily pushes out all those tiny little cut pieces. You are left with a perfectly clean, gorgeous frame every time. This tool is a lifesaver for intricate dyes or background designs which have lots of fine elements in them. So here are the four frames that I created using some heavyweight cardstock. Now for techniques like these, I usually prefer heavyweight cardstock because it gives the entire panel so much more stability, especially once we start adding the glossy accent. A lighter weight cardstock can warp or shift, and that's the last thing you want after all that beautiful work. Now, out of the four frames, I went ahead and glued three of them together using liquid glue, and honestly, this part took some time. The design is so intricate that adding glues to all those tiny little areas is definitely a bit of a patience game. You can use spray adhesive or even cut out your panels from adhesive sheets. But when it comes to lining things up, I'm not very confident with either of these options. That's why I prefer liquid glue. It gives me that little wiggle room I need to perfectly align each frame on top of each other. The one frame we kept separate is the one I'm adding directly onto an A2 size cardstock panel. And again, I'm using a heavyweight cardstock here for that extra stability. But you'll notice at the end that even with the heavyweight cardstock, my panel still warped quite a bit. Now, since this is my very first time trying this technique, I definitely still have a lot to learn, especially when it comes to preventing that warping. So, well, if you guys have tried this faux stained glass method using glossy accents before and you have any tips for keeping the paper piece nice and flat, please let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what's worked best for you. Now it's time to bring in all the beautiful colors. Well, I know it's a little hard to see on camera right now because we are working white on white. But in person, it's actually really easy to color in all those tiny little sections. And at this stage, it's completely fine if your marker goes over the edges or overlaps into the frame. Don't worry about staying perfectly inside the lines. We are going to cover this entire frame with the stacked trio of die cut frames we glued together earlier, so none of that overlap will show in the final result. For coloring itself, I'm using my Ohuhu alcohol markers and I specifically chose brush tip markers because some of those spaces are quite large and the brush nib makes it super quick and smooth to fill it in. I decided to stick with the traditional holiday colors. We have some rich reds for the poinsettia petals, vibrant greens for the leaves, and pretty blue to create the background that really makes everything pop. To add a little more depth and dimension, I used two shades of each of those color families. Layering the lighter and the darker tones gives the final stained glass effect so much more richness once the glossy accents go on top. Even though the steps takes a little bit of time, it is one of my favorite parts because you really start to see the image come together. So at this stage, I'm simply coloring inside all of those open areas. You will probably notice that I'm getting marker all over the white die cut outlines, and that's totally okay. In fact, this part is supposed to look messy. None of that extra color on the frame is going to matter because, like I said, we'll be adding the stacked die cut frames right on top, and that will completely hide any overlapping or stray marker lines. All you really need to focus on here is getting solid color on every open space of the design. Now I'm using alcohol markers because that's what I had on hand and they work beautifully for this type of coloring, and that's what I'm more comfortable with. But honestly, you can use whatever medium you prefer, be it watercolors, regular markers, or even color pencils. If you didn't want to color each individual section, another option would be to do some ink blending on this entire white panel before adding your die cut frame. There are a lot of ways you could do this. You could even skip coloring altogether and just do like what I have done in my previous videos where I did die cut inlay. You could cut uh, some solid colored cardstocks, inlay this design, and then add your glossy accents. But since I really wanted that classic stained glass effect, coloring each section with simple clean colors felt like the best way to achieve that look. It gives the final piece such a beautiful feel once that glossy accent goes on top. As much as I love doing the inlay die cut technique, I feel it would take much longer for a background this large. Inlaying every single tiny little piece, especially on a design with so many sections, would turn up into a very intensive project. But if I were working with a smaller outline die, I would absolutely want to try creating a true stained glass look using actual inlaid die cut pieces instead of coloring all these sections. Once all the coloring is complete, I'm bringing in the stacked die cut frame we created earlier and I'm simply placing it right on top of this main colored panel. This part is actually very easy. These frames line up beautifully, so you really shouldn't run into any issues getting everything perfectly aligned over the colored areas. Just like before, I'm using liquid glue for this step. It gives me a little wiggle room to shift things into place and make sure that the frame sits exactly where it needs to be. Now, once everything is pressed down, you can already start to see that gorgeous background shining through. Honestly, if I weren't doing the stained glass technique today, I would stop right here. A simple sentiment strip on top of this colorful panel with the crisp white frame would make an absolutely stunning card all on its own. The colors look so vibrant, and that white frame really makes them pop. I did give the panel a couple of minutes to let the glue set before moving on to the glossy accents. Now, Glossy Accent is a 3D clear gloss medium and it has so many uses. You can use it as an adhesive for things like sequences, even on tricky surfaces like fabric or felt, because it dries crystal clear and holds everything securely. I also use it a lot on my winter themed holiday projects. I add a layer of glossy accents and then sprinkle white glitter powder on top to create snowy banks or sparkly Christmas tree branches. Once it dries, it looks like fresh, glittery snow sitting right on top of your project. But for today's card, we are using glossy accents to fill each of those open wells in the frame. And this right here is definitely the most time consuming part of the entire process. You're essentially filling each section like a tiny window pane, but the end result is absolutely worth every minute. Now, when you first apply, the glossy accents will look cloudy or milky, but don't worry, that's totally normal. As it dries, it becomes completely clear. If you notice any bubbles forming while you're adding it, you just use a pokey tool and gently move the bubbles around to pop it. You can even blow on it, it'll break the surface. Now, once it dries, you're left with a beautiful glassy shine every time. Now, typically on my other projects, I only need to let the glossy accents dry for an hour or so because those layers are very thin. But for this project here, we are working with 4 stacked frames, which means each well is much deeper than the regular cards that I would create. That thicker layer of glossy accent is going to need significantly more drying time, almost a full day in my case. Here you can see I'm using the pokey tool to gently move the bubbles around and break them. It's such a simple step, but it really helps make each section dry perfectly smooth. And just take a closer look at that beautiful shine. Right now the glossy accent looks a little milky and cloudy, but don't worry, it'll dry completely clear. I set my panel aside for almost an entire day and let everything cure properly. Even with that heavyweight cardstock giving the panel extra stability, you will see that this has warped quite a bit. This is definitely one area where I'd love your suggestions. If you have any tips or tricks to prevent warping at this stage, please drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear how you tackle this problem. But don't you think this panel looks absolutely gorgeous? That beautiful shine and the glass effect is exactly what we were looking for. Now, even though we have 4 layers of stacked frames, I decided to use foam tape to adhere the panel onto my card base. Now, this is a little trick I often use when working with embossed panels or panels that are slightly warped due to heat embossing. The foam tape won't completely straighten the warp panel, but it does give it a little extra stability and makes it sit nicely on a card base. I attached the panel on top of an A2 size top folding card base, and for my sentiment, I stamped and heat embossed a beautiful frame. This is from the Vintage Holiday Swag stamp set by Simon's Stamp, which says, "May the season bring warmth to you and yours." Now, I absolutely love this stamp set because it has those beautiful floral images, and also it has some beautiful scripty holiday sentiments that you could use on your projects. To make that sentiment pop even more, I stacked 2 pieces of black cardstock behind the strip before adhering it to my faux stained glass frame. And with that, here's a look at the finished card. The colors, the shine from the glossy accents, and the layered frame all come together for that true magical holiday look. This technique definitely takes some time, but the end result is so worth it, and it's such a fun way to make your holiday cards truly unique. Now, all the supplies that I used to create this card will be listed down in the description box below. Please note that all of these links are affiliate links, which means that if you shop using one of my links, I'll get a small commission at no cost to you guys. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to my channel for more card making tutorials, tips, and holiday inspiration. Thank you again for joining me today. Until next time, stay safe.